Welcome, welcome, welcome. Health Issues. I'm your host, Chris Sylvain. This is a major show we want you to watch, be a part of. We're going to be talking to Representative Wesley Bishop. Thank you, Representative. How are you?
Hey, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited to have you. You know, we're leading up even to the show, and we're thankful for your time and you spending time. We're going to cut right to the chase. You're a part of a conference that's coming up, and this is probably a show after the conference or whatever, but you are involved in this idea of reducing the incarceration rate of in Louisiana. Am I right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Let me tell you kind of how that got started. Okay. As you know, long before I ever got elected to Louisiana legislature, I was a professor of criminal justice at Southern University at New Orleans, and I still serve in that capacity.
Right.
And I'm also a practicing attorney, so probably more so than the average person in the legislature. I'm pretty familiar with the criminal justice system, how a lot of young people, particularly young people that look like us, end up getting involved in the criminal justice system. So that's one of the issues that I'm really very familiar with, and kind of burns on my heart to try to make sure we do something to try to solve that particular problem. This past legislative session, I filed a couple of pieces of legislation to try and deal with those issues. I work with a group called VOTE, and that group is led by a gentleman named Norris Henderson. It's called Void of the Ex-Offender, and also a young lady named Dana Kaplan, who works with the Juvenile Justice Project. And we just started a conversation, and much of this was done by my predecessor, now Congressman Cedric Richmond. When he moved on to Congress, they approached me about looking at some of the issues as related to criminal justice. So we talked a lot about that. One of the pieces that I'm most proud of that we had a chance to pass, I was told that many individuals who go to jail and decide that they want to try and rehabilitate themselves, get involved and learn trades while they are incarcerated, becoming a welder, carpenter, cosmetologist, or whatever the case may be. The problem is that once those individuals get out of jail, they have to receive a license by the state in order to practice that particular trade. And oftentimes their previous record stands in the way from them being able to get their license. So it defeats the entire purpose of them actually rehabilitating themselves while they're in jail. So we just passed a law, and it was just signed, that states that someone's criminal record cannot be used against them unless that record is solely directed to the job that they're actually trying to get. And so in that situation, if someone is simply trying to be a barber, be a licensed trade, and gain a meaningful living, if they were involved in something with them much longer and it had nothing to do with that, they can use that and apply that towards the trade. So we're able to work with that piece. And we continue to work with them, as well as with other lawmakers around the state of Louisiana, to try to shorten sentences, to possibly to look at ways where we can get individuals out of jail cells and back into our society and being meaningful citizens making meaningful wages.
Well, you know, we applaud Cindy Chang with her 8-part series in Times-Picayune, partly, and I would say partly because to me the elephant in the room is, and I actually call it genocide based upon the United Nations definition of genocide. The Human Rights Department of the United States, the definition of genocide is when you take one race group, a whole group of people, and you literally depopulate that people and not just kill them, but prevent them from literally fostering and growing. They call that genocide. So in any event, what we have, the African-American male, the young African-American male is being destroyed at such a point with being placed in prison. And Cindy Chang, no matter how much we applaud her, it's almost as if she acted as though the elephant wasn't even in the room. We're dealing with black males. This is a black male issue of the incarceration rate, pure and simple. There's no doubt about it. The numbers are off the charts. It's around the world. But New Orleans, well, not New Orleans, but Louisiana is the hotspot for a number of reasons, and it is one of the worst things that could ever happen. I think when we look at history ever, what's going on right now, the amount of young black males just came from Tulane and Broad, and to see it looks like a plantation over there. All of the young black males brought through there, which you're very, very familiar with. The issue then, though, is that they're being brought over there mostly about drug crimes, marijuana, cocaine, or whatever, about drug crimes. But the problem is black men aren't using drugs no more than anybody else. Your thought?
Well, my thoughts are that several thoughts. I think oftentimes what you see happen at Tulane and Broad at criminal district court is oftentimes the byproduct of things that have happened that have gone wrong many, many years before. I don't think you can have a conversation that talks about the drug problem or talks about our criminal justice system that first doesn't start off talking about our family system, our family structure, and our educational system. Because oftentimes what you see happening is that when we take a look at, if we're just talking statistics, when we take a look at our dropout rates in high school, you're going to see any stat that you put out that that affects the community in a negative way typically always affects the African American community in a much more disproportionate negative way. So if the dropout rate for everyone is 30%, typically our dropout rate is substantially higher than that. Okay. So when we take a look at that situation there, if an individual has dropped out of high school, that's usually pretty much an indicator that that person was performing behind their grade level even much earlier on. If we take it even further than that, if we take a look at individuals when they start in kindergarten, chances are they're somewhat behind. And you know as well as I do, they determine the number of jail cells they're going to build in this country every single year by the reading level in 4th grade. So if you're not at grade level in 4th grade, there's a jail cell waiting for you. So you see a situation whereby I think throughout the entire system, or by individuals who go from kindergarten until 14, 15, 16 years old, by the time they're dropping out of high school, they're oftentimes woefully behind in many different stats. And so when that individual then does not have legitimate means of making a living, you then see individuals who tend to turn to illegitimate means, and that's basic human nature. We've taught that in criminal justice since the 1800s. So if that goes on, then I think you see the situation whereby more of us, unfortunately, are in fact involved in illegal activity, whether it's drugs or whether it's any other kind of activity, and then subsequently get involved in the criminal justice system. And then the criminal justice system does not help the matter whatsoever, because you have a situation whereby individuals, once they are in fact arrested, we're less likely to be represented by attorneys. Those of us who are represented by attorneys are less likely to be represented by competent attorneys, or more likely to be represented by public defenders. And if we take a look at the numbers in comparison, I think you see a situation whereby there's a lot more individuals who tend to have, I guess, an unfair outcome to the justice system when they're represented by public defenders than they are by private attorneys. And there's any number of reasons for that, and the literature represents that and supports that and has for quite some time. So I think you said a lot of things that happen as it relates to that. Long story short is that crime tends to happen in a lot of hot pockets, even here in the city of New Orleans and in most of our urban areas. And so if any police department then focuses their energies on those hot pockets, they may be going there looking for crime, looking for murder, looking for arson, any of your capital offenses. However, you'll see a lot of drugs actually occurring there also. The long story short is that you tend to find the crime where you look for it. And so if this is where we're focusing on that crime, it's no wonder why we see the outcomes that we do.
Well, this is a question, and this is what we're asked. You know, we spoke with some folk at, Loyola, Tulane's Law Clinic, Loyola Law Clinic, and we, approached Southern Poverty Law Center and so forth. The issue, though, is that as far as for drug use, though, black males don't have a problem. We don't have a problem. Comparable to the rest of society, black males don't have a problem using drugs. It's not an issue statistically for years, and in fact, it's even gotten a little bit better. There's no issue, no problem as far as for drug use. The drug problem in the black community is not a problem at all statistically. Well, we're no different than any other race, Asians, Hispanics, or anything. The African American males are using drugs at no higher rate than anybody else.
And I don't take issue with that, but even regardless of what anybody else is doing, I think I could not support a statement that says that there is not a drug problem in the black community. There's a drug problem in the black community. There's a drug problem with young black men. There's a drug problem, period, across races. And so I think to say that we don't have a problem, I think is kind of glossing over the point. I think we have a problem.
Well, comparable to other races.
Well, New Orleans is 70% black.
I mean, nationwide, but even Louisiana-wide. I mean, comparable. Even if we're more numbers, but percentage-wise, the amount of teenagers that use drugs, actually African-American males use less drugs than Caucasian males. Okay. All right. And teenager in their 20s, 30s, all the way through that as far as for a drug issue comparable to other races.
I don't take issue with the idea that that our drug use in our community isn't any different if you compare it to any other community. I don't take issue with that.
Right.
What I somewhat differ slightly is that based on our raw numbers, if we have more people who look like this within our population, and our drug rates are the same, we're going to have more people who look like us who are using drugs.
But let's look at Louisiana in general.
Louisiana is population-wise 7% white, 30% black.
Right. But the prison population is
much higher.
The flip.
Much higher.
Right. We're 70, 80% or whatever, or whatever Cindy Chain had in her statistics, 70% or whatever. But basically, it's black jails, African-American male jails. Okay. And, but it's based upon drug issues.
Okay.
And because if you take the drug problem out, then the statistics will be pretty even.
Okay. Okay.
As far as for all other crimes.
And I can agree with you on that. I think one thing that we have not talked about, I guess, at all is that drug use and I guess drug dealing is an easy profession to get into. Right. Doesn't take any experience to do it. So if you have a number of young black males and drug use or drug dealing is something that's prevalent in their community, right. And if they don't see any other options that they can access, it's easy for them to be ushered into that, whether or not it's by a member of their family, a member of the community, or one of their boys. So it's easy to get into, but very difficult to get out of.
But still, when we look at ecstasy and drugs that are not even in the black community, they're heavy in the white community. You know, black folks don't use ecstasy. I mean, you know, they're rarely using some of these other drugs, these so-called party drugs and so forth. But again, what happens is that the police department, you know, in New Orleans, that's Chief Surpass or whatever, and whoever's in Baton Rouge and Houma or whatever, they're targeting African American males.
I don't take issue with that.
Okay. Now, the question would become, though, if drugs are so bad, okay, and drugs are so bad, and we have other professional psychiatrists and so forth that will speak that if we really want to look at sentencing and look at the crimes as far as for the legislature, we're attacking some drugs but not dealing with others. You know, which is really going on. We're not talking about alcohol, but we're talking about other drugs, and we're painting them as this big monster. But the issue then, though, is that if drugs are so bad, why are we arresting black males? Why aren't we arresting white males? You know, and I understand that point. But so it's easier to catch black males. There are other hot pockets of crime and so forth. But then the question then becomes, if we're not going after white males, why not leave the black males alone on the drugs and deal with the other crimes that we're going to get in the first place, instead of taking whole neighborhoods? Right now we have 70% of them, some neighborhoods that are wiped out. There's no black men hardly around because they're all in prison, and the ones that are around have come from prison. Cindy Chang did a great job discussing that point.
Okay. I think that I don't think you can turn your head to any crime. I don't think, whether it's black, white, or Chinese, it really doesn't matter to me. Because I think what ends up happening is that those individuals who are victims of crimes, those individuals, I don't think they really care who or what the race is of the individuals that's involved in that. When I look in my district, I have the largest state house district in the entire city, and it's extremely diverse. But when I talk to particularly elderly citizens in there who have been victims of, let's say, for instance, someone who happened to be whether or not it was on drugs or dealing drugs, whatever the case may be. Well, that very same person might also be someone that's involved in an assault or a battery or things along those lines. Oftentimes we find like individuals are multiple offenders. So to say that, well, let's not focus on crime, let's not focus on crime as it relates to black males, we can spend the next 50 minutes talking about crime and how it disproportionately affects African Americans and how it disproportionately affects African American men. That's not a question whatsoever. I've represented tons of black men who got into those kind of problems. But I think it's a little bit short-sighted if we say that because we're not focusing over here, we should step back and not look to criminalize crime wherever we find it, even if we find it within our black community, even if we find it among young black men. I don't want to pull black men out of any society whatsoever. That's totally contrary to who I am and what I'm all about. But I think if you have crime that's being committed, I think we need to approach that crime in a severe way, because that's the only way we're going to be able to solve what most folks would tell you is the most severe problem in our society.
But the issue then, again, why aren't we trying to solve it in the white community if it's so bad?
I think we're trying to solve it. I think we're trying to solve it. I think
white folk aren't getting arrested. The heroin users are put on Suboxone. All right, we have tons of heroin users. They just go on and use Suboxone and methadone. I mean, they know it. They just go to the doctor and use Suboxone and methadone. You got tons of Vicodin, and most of the deaths, as far as for the death rate, the reason the death rate has narrowed between whites and blacks is because the death rate for whites have gone up because of opiate use, you know, OxyContin and Vicodin and those things. So
I think to address one of the issues that you mentioned OxyContin and things along those lines. And once again, I've represented clients dealing with that. What I've come to find out, what my experience has been, that many of those drugs are used within the privacy of a home. So they're not used in public, whereby the police would have the access to even see exactly what's going on. I can't tell you the last time I saw someone using OxyContin on the street corner. I have not seen that. I've represented a pharmacy owner once before, so I was very familiar with that particular piece there.
Right.
And oftentimes, many of the drugs that we speak of, while they all are recreational, your marijuana, your crack cocaine, more of your easily accessible drugs, one, they're cheap and they're readily available, and unfortunately, they tend to be a lot in our community. They're in other communities as well, but you don't see them as readily available in other communities as you see them here. You actually often see individuals who are of the other race who come into the black community to purchase those drugs.
But you just made the point that statistically, again, white folks are using drugs more than what black folks are using drugs, all right? But the police, instead of, to me, if we're going to be fair, if there's going to be justice, if drugs are the problem, that's which the jail population says, that society has deemed drugs as being the problem, that drugs are being the problem, you know, that is the issue, drugs, victimless crimes, don't hurt nobody, you know, or whatever, they're not bothering anybody, they're using drugs, you know, people, and so, but police aren't knocking on the doors in white neighborhoods trying to find the drugs. They're going in the black neighborhoods for other reasons. And so the thing of it is that out of fairness and justice, to me, the jail population should be the same. It should be based upon statistics. If statistics are saying white folks are using drugs just like black folks are using drugs, all right, cool. If it's 50-50, then we go over to Angola for all of the drug people in there for drugs. It should be 50-50. We go to Tulane and Broad.
Let me tell you the fundamental fallacy with what you're saying. Let me go back to my.
I'm open.
Intro to Criminal Justice 101.
I'm open. Go ahead.
Judge Harry Cantrell taught me this 20 years ago.
Okay, let's go.
And what ends up happening? Let's have 10 people that are arrested.
Okay.
Of those 10 people that are arrested, you know, as you walk through the criminal justice system, charges may only be brought against 5 of those individuals.
Right.
Of those 5 individuals that are actually then brought, at some stage in the process, you may only have 1 or 2 individuals that even go towards a jury.
Okay.
So at the end of the day, you may only have 2 out of that original 10 that are ever actually prosecuted.
Okay.
There's any number of reasons why those 8 individuals are no longer part of the process.
Right.
I think that's really where we talked about a study. I think that's really where that needs to happen at.
Okay.
Because what happens is, if I go in and the day after I get arrested, if I have access to resources that allows me to hire attorney such and such, who has a tremendous reputation as being a criminal defense attorney, and when I show up with my client at the district attorney's office, chances are my outcome might be different if a young man is showing up and he's representing himself.
Is that injustice?
I think that's unfairness. I think that's injustice, but I think that's a reality of our criminal justice system.
Would you be willing to sponsor a bill or support a bill that would look into that injustice wherever you find it?
I would be willing to work with any issue as it relates to what's in the best interest of my community. I've done it before. I'll do it again, particularly as it relates to folks who look like me.
I think that's fantastic. So, all right, I think we got something to hang hat on.
Okay.
So, what Harry Cantrell said was, Dr. Cantrell, we appreciate him, never heard of him, but hey, his name is not noted. All right?
Oh, yeah.
No, all right.
Chaired the Criminal Justice Department at SUNO for 20 years and is a magistrate judge now.
My apologies.
Okay.
I'll look him up.
All right.
But, all right, point well made, that there is injustice in the system based upon the amount of money that people have, based upon race. There's racism and classism within the system that Harry Cantrell spoke about. All right, so therefore, the legislature itself, my understanding, the legislature would be responsible, because this is gross injustice, because, and not even the jail rates, but the arrest rates between African Americans and Caucasians, Hispanics, is a total huge differential in the arrest rates, let alone what goes on once they hit the court system, before they even get to the arrest rates. That my understanding is that the legislature, with this gross injustice that's going on, I call it genocide, gross injustice, should be saying, hey, how do we address this? what do we do? No, we can't go to Chief Surpass and say you're a racist, but there should be some study to say that. Why are you arresting more people? Let's go to the judges and saying, why are they getting out on bond less or whatever? Why are they being locked up more? Once we get to the prison system, you know, what's going on in each area?
I think you're missing a few things.
Okay.
What I think you're missing is that one, I don't think that. I don't think the legislature will be willing to, and I don't think it's the duty of the legislature to tell the chief of police here or anywhere else who or where to arrest. I think there's an element called discretion that's prevalent in our criminal justice system, and every aspect of the criminal justice system has to deal with discretion. What you do is you set the policies, we set the laws, we criminalize what is and what is not, and we set sentencing ranges for it. So everyone has to operate within that.
Okay.
If we're speaking of going before judges, usually whatever the crime is, there is a maximum and there is a minimum, 3 to 5 years. And anything in between that is within the discretion of the judge. They only have to give answer to it if they go outside of that particular range. So we've already set the laws in place, and that's what the legislature does. They make the laws.
Okay.
You know, so that's exactly what we're trying to get done. And I can't make the leap that because we have a situation whereby City of New Orleans has a great deal of individuals. A lot of individuals have been arrested. Some individuals are placed in jail. That for some reason, the police department, they are targeting this or targeting that, or not making certain things a priority. Crime is the #1 problem in this entire city, and if you look at most major cities in this country, it's the #1 issue throughout. So I think everybody is trying to do that. Most folks really don't have a clear handle as to how to solve it. And I think for far too long, one of the problems that we have is that we look at crime as if it's in a silo by itself, when it's really tied to many of the other factors that we talked about a little bit earlier.
Right, but from Dr. Cantrell, though, Dr. Cantrell discussed injustices throughout the system. So if the legislative branch is not responsible to address the injustices, what branch?
Let me tell you what Harry Cantrell taught us.
Okay.
And we talked about is the practicalities of the criminal justice system. And that chart that I was mentioned to you a second is a chart that's on page 1 of the textbook that we actually use, and it shows how that occurs throughout. That chart didn't deal with race, didn't deal with sex, didn't deal with nationality. It dealt with simply individuals who were involved in the criminal justice system. So you're going to see that regardless of it. If we went to a place, let's say Butte, Montana, that has no black folks whatsoever,
right,
that chart would still be present.
But we know that where blacks are, that blacks are disproportionately affected at each stage of that chart.
Correct.
Now, I'm sure he taught that too in the class.
Correct.
Yeah, so they're disproportionately affected. And so the question is that there is injustice within the system. What branch of the government would be responsible? I would think it would be the legislative branch to say that wait, this is a problem here. You know what I mean? And because it wouldn't be the executive branch, would it? And it wouldn't be the judicial branch, because they're the ones with the problem.
We talked about doing a study, and we could easily do that, and we do studies all the time, so that wouldn't necessarily be an issue.
Right.
But I don't necessarily know if a study gets you at the end result that you actually want, because I'm assuming that with the study, if the study supports what it is that we're saying, the next question then is that how do we solve the problem?
I think it's quite frank that I think it would obviously show, you know, that what the police departments they're arresting people for drug crimes because they're profiled as people as being criminals. African-American male, they profile them as being a criminal. Okay. So what happens is that the police go in, they do a sweep of the neighborhood. When I was a kid, they do sweep of the neighborhoods and they throw you on the ground. You know what I mean? The policemen step on your hands and the whole bit, because I'm walking by being black. I remember, you know what I mean? Okay. This was back in 1975, so a couple of years ago. And so you're walking by being black, they're going to sweep the neighborhood. So everybody's talking about crime, 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 crime. Small percentage of the black guys doing crime, but what happens is they sweep in the neighborhood, and so they're looking for somebody who committed murder, looking for somebody that, you know, shot somebody, you know, that killed somebody. But what happens is that they go in and they find somebody with a bag of weed on them. They find somebody with, you know, crack or some rocks or drug paraphernalia or anything else like that. That's one charge. All right, they may get probation, but on the next charge they get 5. I just came from Tulane and Broad. I'm watching. I thought it was a drug court, so I asked the guy, Steve Singer. He was out there, had him on the show before, lawyer at the law clinic. I said, "Am I in a drug court? What's going on here?" I'm watching young black men, you know, way out of black men in the city. They're right there in Tulane and Broad. Going down there, 5 years for paraphernalia. Justice Kiva Landrum, 3 years for paraphernalia for using drugs, and a second offender. You know, this is nuts. I'm a pharmacist, okay? You know what I mean? You know the amount of people that are hooked on drugs? You know, it's illogical. It doesn't even make sense. You know the amount of folk that are hooked on substances, not just drugs, that you know, alcohol and so forth. You know the amount of the heroin addicts that are in treatment programs. We know the only reason people on crack aren't in treatment programs because there is no like Suboxone or methadone for crack. Marijuana, who's ever died from marijuana? You know what I mean? It's like, so what happens is society has deemed something as corrupt. So all of these young men, disproportionately black, are being hauled away the rest of their lives. And of course, they're coming back professional, knowing how to, you know, they can't get jobs. As your bill stated, they can't get jobs. So they can't get welfare, can't get jobs, can't get anything. I mean, they got to eat. You know, what are we talking about? We've lost, to me, we've lost the sense of what justice is, and it's been wiped out. And so the question is, how do you put Humpty Dumpty back together again? Because in the meantime, young black men are gone. They're wiped out. You know, it's a dead issue. You have such a small percentage, you know, in any neighborhood, any of the black neighborhoods in the city that are operating right now, whether, you know, it's like a black hole pulling us down.
Well, let's kind of go back to kind of how we started this conversation, and I agree with you, but I think that I think the elephant that needs to be in the room is the fact, how do we figure out a way to stop young black men from getting involved in the criminal justice system in the first place? And I think, I think you have to deal with that particular issue, because what we're talking about now is what happens when folks are being arrested and the injustice that occurs once they get arrested. My concern, probably more so than any other aspect of this conversation, is to try and make sure that these folks aren't involved in the criminal justice system from the very beginning, which is why we talked a little bit about the educational system, which is why we talked about the family structure, because I think that, more so than anything else, can make a severe dent in what is it we're trying to get done. Oftentimes, by the time professionals like you and I get involved in it and try to deal with these young black men, it's a little bit too late because they're already involved in the system. So we're trying to figure out now, how do we try and resolve what's already a bad situation, whereby I would suggest that we try and fix the situation to the extent where they don't get involved in the first place. And that goes back to dealing with our educational system, our church structure, our family, things along those lines, so they have realistic options before they get involved in criminal activity. And whether the police are looking in their neighborhood or not for this particular crime, and they happen to do a sweep and they pick up all the young men who are involved in dealing with drugs, whether it's marijuana or crack, if we have fewer young men dealing in marijuana or crack, when the sweep occurs, there's less of us to catch.
Yeah, but the issue, that the premise to that is that black men have a problem. The argument I'm saying is that we don't have a problem with black men. Black men there's nothing wrong with black men in and of themselves. That black men are fine. We just had a couple of geneticists on the line. Black men are just as intelligent as anybody else. We can operate just like anybody else. The issue then is that since society has profiled us and targeted us, all right, for the same activity that everybody else is doing, the same drug rates, all right, we end up with disproportionate outcomes. We end up being disenfranchised. At once, all right, we smoke weed, they smoke weed. They smoke weed, nothing happens. They go off, become President of the United States. We smoke weed, we go to jail. Once we go to jail, we got a record. We can't finish school. And like you said, we can't get a profession. We can barely go to school. We can't get a job. You know what I mean? So the system has created an issue for black men. Anyway, Chris Sylvain, health issues. Thank you, Representative Wesley Bishop. We're excited about you. Awesome.
Thank you.
Hey, fight as hard as you can. Destroy everything in the room. Knock it down. Don't go for that. Don't go for what?